Hey, everybody, welcome. I am Stephen Casimiro, and with me today is Adam Cramer, the CEO of the Outdoor Alliance. Talk about taking it for the team. Adam does what is a thankless job, thankless not to the people who are deep in the weeds of policy and in the industry and public lands, because people know that he's been carrying the flag for the outdoor culture and public lands for a solid decade. But most consumers, or most I hate that word, consumers. Most people probably have never heard of the Outdoor Alliance and never heard of Adam within that context. And so we're gonna fix that today, and we're gonna talk about. He's going to tell us what Outdoor Alliance does, the victories, and most important, how you can actually take really effective, empowering action. Because as we all know, it's a bit of a mess right now. So, Adam, welcome.
Thanks, Stephen. Great to be here.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for a while. It's so great to have you on. So, um, there's a ton of acronyms, in the outdoor and NGO space, and there's a lot of organizations with outdoor in the name, and so it's understandable that people might get confused. So let's start with, what is Outdoor Alliance, and what do you guys do?
Yeah, great question. So we're an organization, we're an advocacy organization, and we're a coalition. That's like the most important thing. We're made up of 10 national organizations, all of whom are oriented around a certain type of human-powered outdoor pursuit, like whitewater kayaking, surfing, climbing, mountain biking, backcountry skiing. So organizations that all your listeners have heard about for years, like IMBA, Access Fund, American Alpine Club, American Whitewater. They've all have been doing incredible work, throwing down for their respective communities and places that they love for decades and being very, very effective at it. And they had this realization that they've got this common set of ethics and perspectives on things, values. They've got a lot together, and if they work together, they can get a lot more done as a collective, and also in terms of how things work in Washington D.C. and national policy. Consensus is the coin of the realm. It's how stuff gets done, and these organizations, since they believe they can get on with each other and they have common values, um, that if they work together, they can secure some pretty significant victories for the outdoors and for their respective communities. So it all arose out of mountain bikers, kayakers, surfers, climbers wanting to give back and do good, and designing a system to work together to do that. And that's what Outdoor Alliance is.
All right, you're located in DC. Are you the most visible, I don't know what descriptor you want to use, among the most visible advocate for the outdoors in DC?
I don't know. We're present. You've heard that phrase. The world is ruled by those who show up, right? So I wouldn't say that we're in charge of anything, but we're present, and we pay attention to what's going on, and we dip in at the right time, and we've made a difference. So for sure.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's being modest, but I mean, OA, I mean, I mean, you're kicking ass in DC, and I don't think most people know that. So, all right. So it's a group, surf rider, like it's kind of the usual suspects, the NGOs that we adore, that we give our money to, that we value, people like Chad and other folks, EDs, who, are recognizable names, people who've been in the trenches for a long time, pooling their resources and trying to get a bigger lever. So you've had some real victories, but before we get to the victories, and you have a lot that you do. You just put out your 2024 annual report, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff about the action steps that you take there. But tell us about communication with elected representatives when you go to the Hill,
Mm.
because you talk about consensus being the coin of the realm. And so to get consensus, you have to have personal relationships. You have to be, face to face with people. So, and I saw that you have something like, I don't have the number right, but like 526 or 426 meetings, something like 8 a week over the last year. So
Mhm.
tell me about like that process and how you get the meetings and how you develop those relationships and what you share to people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the first meetings we pursue in the relationships are internal. You know, we want to make sure that all the organizations, all the staff, they know each other, and we've established those relationships. those working relationships over the last 10 years. So you've got all these really smart people at IMBA, at American Whitewater, at Alpine Club, Winter Wildlands, and they all get on with each other and get a sense of their respective communities and respective values. And all these organizations have got, you know, their memberships and their networks and people all across the country with all this incredible knowledge and sentiment about places, right? So we spend a lot of time thinking about, internally what's going on, what do people know, what's the community vibe, what's the internal consensus. Like that's the starting point, right? And once we have a sense of that, and it's an evolving continual thing, right? It's not just a static thing. You just got to nurture these relationships. And um, once we have a sense of that, then we know what to talk about, right? And then you kind of filter through like, all right, of all these things that are important to us, who are the policymakers, who are the senators or the Congress people or the folks in the federal agencies that need to hear about what we think and what could be done about those things, right? Some things that we're in favor of, some things that are challenging, but it starts with a kind of an internal sense of what we want to do, and then we we couple that with empowering the community to act and speak for themselves, because all these people all across the country, they've got their constituents. So they've got standing to talk to their own senators and their own Congress people and their own forest supervisors. So we help them understand what the issues are, right? To frame things in terms of policy and advocacy, and we set people up to share those sentiments with lawmakers directly. So we do it. Of course, we have relationships with lawmakers and their staff here in DC, which is super super important. But that ecosystem is bigger than the Beltway. Lawmakers have got staff back home in the states and the districts, and we try to forge relationships between people that live in those places and their elected officials and their policymakers.
So the biggest win recently is the Explore Act, correct?
It's up there, man.
Okay,
It's a
so
big
tell us,
deal.
tell us what that did. So it was bipartisan, okay, and it
Oh
was
yeah.
unanimous the vote. So this is it's a shocking legislative event because getting Republicans and Democrats to agree about even the time of day. Good luck with that. So we have this huge act that is very pro outdoor recreation, trying to like clarify things. So tell us. Let's start with what the Explore Act did, and let's talk a little bit about what you guys did to help get that across the line.
Oh yeah. It's a huge package, and as you point out, yeah, first of its kind, bipartisan, um, passed out of the House, um, Senate, signed into law. It's a huge deal, and it took us. We've been working on this thing for 10 years, man. Long game, long game, and it's got stuff in there for outdoor recreation, like for pretty much everybody. Like there's provisions in there for mountain biking on long distance trails. There are provisions in there that clarify fixed anchor policy. Provisions in there to help better served, historically underserved communities across the country. Provisions in there for veterans, making guiding and accessing policy more modern and more transparent and easier to get more people outside. The list goes on for gateway communities. So it's like this. I think it's like 100+ pages of legislation. So um, the fact that there was bits and pieces in there for everybody made it, more amenable for passage, more support. So so a lot of really good stuff in there. Oh, and there's some provisions in there to help the federal agencies coordinate with each other on recreation. So they're not just all siloed and thinking about, Forest Service style or BLM style, help them share best practices. So it's a real forward thinking piece of recreation policy that's never been done before.
Oh, Adam, sorry to interject, but I was kind of curious. Like I hear all these provisions, and that's great. Like I'm familiar with like the clarifying of the policy around, bolting for climbers. And I think it's safe to say, I think, so correct me if I'm wrong, that the Explore Act really brings modernizes the federal approach to outdoor recreation, which has really boomed. So I'm curious, like maybe give us a couple specific examples of like, all right, specifically what does it do for mountain bikers, gateway communities around national parks, federal lands are critical. What's in there for them? How does it make life better for them?
Yeah. So for mountain biking, it directs federal agencies to come up with long distance mountain bike trails, long epic adventures. And, you know, trails are great. Bigger trails, longer trails would be better. And, they've got to be cited and designed and built, and they don't just come out of nowhere. So to have that vision and say, all right, agencies, let's turn this into a reality, is a super concrete example. And another one that's very concrete is this acronym called uh, FICOR, which is a federal interagency working group that helps the agencies share their best practices on recreation. Because we all think about public lands, but they're all different types of public lands, whether it's Forest Service or Park Service or BLM, and they've got different rules and regulations and different permitting. And you know, FICOR helps all of them get on the same page, oriented around the same type of goal in terms of enabling Americans to go out and enjoy their public lands. And you don't get tripped up by different interpretations about things. So it harmonizes people's experience about public lands. And I think one of the most important things is the modernization of guiding and permitting, through the SOAR Act. And what that's going to do for people is that it's going to make it easier for more people to experience the outdoors through guides and permitting. And the old system was pretty antiquated and difficult and expensive. And this way, with more streamlined and efficient approach, the end result is going to be people who want to go outside and need a guide are going to be able to do that all
What's
across the
different about it?
country.
What did they change?
Um, I'm not, yeah, you got
there's a
me.
hundred. There's a
You got
hundred
me.
pages. That's
You got me.
okay.
You got me,
It's
man.
okay. I'm just one of the things that I'm curious about as we're talking and
Yeah.
is like where does the rubber meet the road on these things? Because I think that this is I think it's an issue with people feeling disconnected from their government and how they're and not knowing how their government works, right, and not kind of understanding and what's going on and it's I've read legislation and it's really hard to follow and I just
Yeah.
as we talked a couple of weeks ago I went really deep in the weeds on changes to the NEPA Act, right, and it's like
Mhm.
and I talked to the policy director at Winter Wildlands Alliance and she kind of sort of walked me through the history of
Mhm.
NEPA and I mean it's really thorny stuff, it's complicated stuff and so I think that man, I'm so empathetic to the challenge of communicating this and the critical role that your constituent groups make up in community, whether it's Surf Riot or whomever, like how you activate people and get them, uh, in motion. So with the Explore Act, one of the things may not be very interesting to talk about. I don't know, but I'm so fascinated, like with the Explore Act specifically about the meetings that you have on the Hill, on Capitol
Yeah.
Hill, and I know that you've been able to bring um, activist athletes to DC to meet with their representatives. And I'm kind of very curious what that process is like, how you develop your talking points. Are you meeting with the reps? Are you meeting with their staff? Like what is that? Because that does seem like, yes, it's critical that the NGOs, the activist groups activate their members, but like you're talking face to face with the people who are voting for these things. So what's that like?
Yeah. Well, it's important to realize that all these folks are human beings and they got jobs to do and they're accountable to their constituents, right? And they've got different views on different policy and politics, but ultimately they're accountable at a minimum to 700,000 people in a congressional district, and it's a difficult job. Or if you're a senator, it's like could be millions and tens of millions of people in a bigger state. So I try to have some compassion and empathy to think about like, it's pretty weighty. They got to make decisions. They got to vote on legislation. They got to decide where taxpayer money goes. And they have to make these decisions on behalf of, ton of people that they can never talk to all, right? And so it requires them to so from my perspective, I try to just and all the people within the coalition just be aware of that basic dynamic. Like you're talking with people that have this pretty weighty responsibility. right? And they're also human beings with their own perspectives and values and experiences as well. But being aware of that is, I think, is very important. And then when we show up, in many cases, we're constituents and we're helping them model out and get a sense as to like how to exercise their judgment. We won't always agree on everything, not even close. But if we could bring some insights and perspectives, that reflect some aspect of their constituents, it helps them do their job. It helps them exercise their judgment. And that is inherently good, and that's a valuable endeavor. And I think back to our broader community, whether they're athletes or just people that have a, passion for the outdoors, they've got these real world experiences and insights, and they know what they're talking about. Right. So that's valuable, and it enables over the long term, bigger picture, better policymaking, better decisions, better judgments, a little more precise than they could have been because we've got that information, that authentic perspective. And they need that to do their jobs.
How much weight do representatives put on the calls and emails that they get from constituents, the feedback on social? I mean, they're getting pulled in a lot of directions, and I really appreciate you emphasizing the human element of it, because they are people caught in pressure from all sides, not the least of which is their leadership. So and speaking as just a citizen and wanting to have my voice be effective, I mean, fivecalls.org, like, how effective are those? Like, is it a waste of time, or do they feel the pressure on those things, from those things?
Oh, my goodness. It's so not a waste of time, and it matters a tremendous amount. I mean, you look at how congressional offices are staffed. They have people called legislative correspondents. Their job is to like listen to constituents, field calls, look at emails, synthesize all this stuff. And so they're constantly assessing what the state and the district, what the signals they're getting from individual constituents, and also from leaders from their jurisdictions, whether there's a county commissioner or a business leader. So it's like they aggregate citizens with, other voices that suggest or kind of carry more weight because they represent other people. And, it's not, purely a mathematical equation. There's some art to it, but they absorb all this information. And they make their judgments. So, they've got the staffing and infrastructure. To me, that validates the idea that, they're listening, and they change their minds sometimes, or they'll do certain things based on what constituents have to say. They'll be responsive. Real good example is like this effort to fire federal employees, right? So it was across the federal government. What we did is we had focused on the federal agencies, the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Park Service, because our organizations, our communities kind of know a thing or two about public lands, and we shared what was going on with our community, and people showed up and they wrote their lawmakers at scale. I think we generated well over 100,000 letters to Congress from the outdoor community. And then in response to that, you start seeing action by members of Congress to challenge some of these policies, right? So and from Republicans and Democrats, new pieces of legislation introduced to hire folks back. And then I've seen other Congress people write the administration saying, hey, can you let the Park Service hire people, because we're getting to spring and summer, and these parks are super important to our communities and our economies, and they need to be staffed. So, you know, um, they're hearing from their constituents, they're taking action. The system's working in certain regards. It's we're helping make that happen, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think I have two thoughts. One is that if you're if you're silent, somebody else's voice is in their ear. So, if you don't speak up, you're leaving a vacuum for somebody who may not agree with you to speak up. So th- there's that element, right? And then the other is that a vocal outcry from the public gives a representative cover, right? Like I'm just doing what the people want, and I think that that's always been true in politics. Like, okay, make me do this, force me to do this, make an outcry so I can cover my butt. Is that correct?
Yes, especially the first part. If you don't show up, you're doubling the value of somebody that does show up that you don't agree with, right?
Mm.
And it gives them cover, but not in it gives them cover, but also empowers them to do their job, which is to approach policy from the perspective of their constituents. And if you're a constituent, you don't share what you think, you know, you they can't act on your behalf.
So, I don't know if you have these numbers off the top of your head, put you a little bit on the spot. The outdoor recreation industry, it's gotten measured in the last few years in ways that it never had been previously. So give us a sense of economically how big this is, and it's going to lead to my next question. It's kind of about storytelling, but yeah, how big is the
Sure.
outdoor recreation culture, and how do you define that?
Well, I mean, how I define it is the progression of it. The Outdoor Industry Association first did some economic analysis for their members, and then there was a move to get the federal government to actually measure it itself, and so not just having an industry group. So the federal government does it, and it's along the lines of about $1 trillion of contribution to GDP, and you could split that up in different states. And but it's all pretty stunning. But those numbers cover way more than just mountain biking and climbing. It includes the RV industry and boating and just in a very broad and generous definition of outdoor recreation, which is appropriate. There's a lot of different ways to engage with the outdoors, and yeah, and the public lands support all of it.
Okay, so $1 trillion annually, that's huge.
Oh yeah,
That's huge. That's massive. So my next question then, I've one of the things that I think about a lot, especially with Adventure Journal and communicating, is how do we get people to feel empowered and to act? And our role is really to tell stories. We're not an activist publication, but I'm always mindful that I know that our readers are really invested in public lands and the environment, and they want to act. And so the increasingly I'm hearing it's like facts don't change minds, really. The facts are incredible when you look at the economy. And I mean, what we're seeing with the current administration and this destruction of whether it's the National Park Service or whatever it is. I mean, clearly these are not economic decisions being made, because you would never, I forget what the multiple is on national parks, but I think it's like 14x. So for every dollar spent on national parks, it returns something like 14 times. Does that sound about right?
that's right. No,
So,
not just national parks, but public lands generally. Yeah.
you know what? I want to invest in that. It's more reliable than the stock market or a high yield savings account. So, I mean, it's an incredible return on investment. So, you're in a position where you're trying to persuade people, right? You're trying to persuade them that these things are important. So, what is your approach from a storytelling standpoint, from using facts versus anecdotes? And I ask this because I'm curious, but also because I think a lot of people be like, well, okay, how am I personally more effective in talking to my friends?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely narratives that's how human beings process information. I mean, facts are important, right? And they can inform the narrative. And, a data oriented approach is what we pursue at Outdoor Alliance. You start with the data, but then it's like, how do you interpret it? How do you sequence it? How do you present it in a way that's relevant to how people think about themselves and how they fit into the world? Right. And, you know, just talking about the economic value of it, it's powerful, but if you couple that with stories, with how it enhances the quality of life in rural communities, that puts a little more oomph behind the numbers themselves. It's also like, to what end? You got the data, but you try to convince um, the audience to think about things in a certain way, and stories can be super helpful in that regard.
Do you have to have something on the table, a bill on the table in front of people to really get in there and talk to them about it that you're advocating for? Or are you able to just sort of have general meet and greets with folks just to, you know, build your network and keep them apprised to what's going on in the outdoor culture?
If the bill's already on the table, so that might even be too late. I want to talk to
Mm.
them when they're thinking about the bill, when they're thinking about the idea, the issue, the policy issue that might result in a piece of legislation, or might result in an investigation, or might suggest that they should spend more money on one thing or another. So, and again, it goes back to stories and people's experiences and their values. And maybe there's something to do about it from a policy perspective. Maybe not. But it starts with those experiences and those stories and those needs, those human needs and values.
So we're talking in spring of 2025. It's a very dynamic time in DC, to put it mildly. Are there any bills out there that directly affect the outdoor community that we should know about?
Well, legislative, like right now, the administration is kind of setting the cadence. There's not a ton of legislative activity right now. But there are some pieces of legislation. One from Congressman Zinke and Congressman Vasquez from Nevada and from New Mexico, respectively, a Republican and a Democrat. And that's a bill to keep public lands in public hands. And it's a wonderful initiative, and it's a nice offset to the vibe that's been going around for the last couple of years, and it's been ticked up now to privatize public lands either directly or through management or through divestiture. So that bipartisan piece of legislation from two Western lawmakers sure is a ray of hope, and it'd be great to see that get some more momentum.
And the gist of that, I'm trying to rack in my brain here. It's something that the federal government, see, the federal government has the ability, and I mean, they have the responsibility to transact, public lands on behalf of all Americans, right? So you can't expect them not to be able to sell off lands or acquire lands. But I think this one, it says that anything over 300, like a substantial parcel, anything over 300 acres can't be sold. Tell us what's going on with this bill.
Yeah, it more fundamentally, there's this big piece of legislation or bill that passed back in the '70s called FLIPMA. It's Federal Lands Management, um, and it states like the policy of the government is to keep the federal estate generally intact, right? Public lands should stay in public hands, um, and but they do say like, look, sometimes it does make sense to transfer public lands, right? And for the public good, if the land can't be managed appropriately. And the way that it goes forward is through land management processes at a local level. And if you decide that, you need to sell a parcel, and it's in the public good and there's oversight and public involvement, you could do it. So like generally keep them. But sometimes in certain cases to transfer them at market value makes sense.
Yeah, it makes my head spin, honestly. I don't know how you keep it all straight from day to day. And one of the things that we talked about before we talked was like, how far into the policy do we go, and how do we keep this conversation so that it's relevant for people? And it's really this is what you live every day. I don't, but I find it really challenging because to me the policy details are really, they're fascinating, but people really quickly are going to tune out because they're just trying to get through their day and find more time to go ride their bike or whatever. So one of the things you had mentioned when we were prepping for this was about kind of the lead that your constituent groups take on things. And the Explore Act, um, I encourage people to just Google it, read it for themselves if they can, and learn more, because there is so much in it. And the stuff it pretty quickly can make your eyes glaze over, but this stuff really matters in the real world. And one of the things that you were telling me about was like with this guide permitting, it sounds like, oh my God, guide permits, paperwork, shoot me now. But it has an effect on the real world. And the Mountaineers, which is a group in Seattle, led the charge on this. So tell us that story, like what the Mountaineers did and how it gets more people in the mountains.
Yeah, part of their mission is not just to conserve and protect, the Pacific Northwest and Washington State in particular, is like they get people outside, and they've been doing that for decades as an organization. So when it came time to like modernize permit and guide regulations, I mean, who better to inform that process than the Mountaineers and others with American Mountain Guides Association. So it enabled, they were able to take charge, and then bring the consensus of the broader community, being part of Outdoor Alliance, and leveraging their expertise to get stuff done in that space. And you see it happen again and again. Like American Whitewater, they know rivers really, really well, right? And Access Fund and Alpine Club understanding, you know, bolting policy, for example. So as a collective, we're able to work together and leverage the different organizations in their respective communities' expertise and knowledge to advance things for the common good.
So can you, we'll put this in the show notes, but can you just tell people your 10 constituent groups, the organizations that are part of the Alliance? So as we're continuing the conversation, they can have that in the back of their mind.
Certainly. The 10 organizations are the Access Fund, American Canoe Association, American Whitewater, the International Mountain Biking Association, also known as IMBA, Winter Wildlands Alliance, the Mountaineers, American Alpine Club, the Mazamas, the Colorado Mountain Club, and Surfride Foundation.
The heavy hitters. So, how much of your comms through Outdoor Alliance are consumer? Guys, I keep coming out of this stupid word. Citizen focused. We're not consumers. We're citizens.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about that balance between your OA's activation versus these constituent groups. Do you have a really strong citizen outreach? Is that an important part of your mission, or do you rely mostly on the groups?
A mission, it's like, well, we do both, but it's like, it's part of the design. We got to at first figure out what's going on, and we could speak on behalf of our community directly with lawmakers, like being in DC. But what's most powerful, because they're not just ideas, but they're ideas that arise out of hundreds of thousands of people, is to educate the community in terms of what's going on and what they could do about it. We see ourselves as, in a sense, kind of like guides. When you do, you go on you run in a river for the first time, you're skiing a line for the first time. It's difficult. You got to stop, you got to scout, you got to check things out. If you go with a local and they know the line, you go a lot more rapidly. You go with more confidence. So we're not teaching people, and they know how to be citizens, but like this stuff it's complicated. As you point out, it's complex. There are a lot of acronyms, and people want to ride their bikes, and they also have their jobs and their families. So what we do is like, we look at all this stuff, we distill it, we figure out what's most important, whether it matters or whether it doesn't. And then we connect the dots to how the community could do something about it themselves. And that's what makes us such an effective and authentic organization. We're not just a bunch of talking heads. We're not just coming up with ideas and pontificating about things. We're using consensus. We're using our coalition model to figure out what's the most important things to the community, and then connecting it back so the community could act and speak for themselves. And from a lawmaker's perspective, they want to know what I think. They want to know what Lewis Gelman thinks. They want to know what Tom O'Keefe thinks or Eric Murdoch thinks at Access Fund. They're experts. But if you couple that with climbers from Arizona and mountain bikers from North Carolina, like that puts things over the edge. It's not just a concept, right? It relates to people's lives and their values. And circling all the way back to the earlier part of our conversation, it empowers the lawmakers to do their jobs and exercise their judgment in a much more precise and meaningful way than if they're just, listen to people, they don't really know what they're talking about or have other agendas. is accountability. We're accountable to each other. We trust each other. We find some consensus. And we empower people to take action and be civically engaged.
Yeah, I can hear your passion for that. I mean, I can tell how you're just so clearly invested. And also, what I also hear here, there, this is, I think, a really important takeaway is your belief that we can make change, because so many of us feel impotent right now and powerless, and we can change things, right? But we got to show up.
100%. You can't change everything, but there's some part of the universe over which you have some control, some comparative advantage. And you can make things a little better. And, for our community, I think like you get so much from these experiences, from these landscapes, from your friends, right? And like the balance sheet is like heavily in your favor in terms of what you get out of these places. And if we're so enriched by these experiences, and these relationships and these friendships, right? Like we try to help people give a bit back, use what they've learned to, to conserve and protect these places for themselves and for the future.
So, one of the strategies of the current administration is the quote unquote flood the zone approach, where they just inundate um, us with radical change, and it's a lot of it we don't even hear about it; it just gets lost. So, um, can you give us an overview of what's happening now, spring 2025, and with public lands? And we've touched on the privatization briefly. We mentioned the firings of people on the Forest Service and National Park Service. Um, where are we now? Let's start with an overview of where we are now, and then talk about what we as citizens can do about it.
Yeah. So the firings are huge, and we're still only a couple months in this new administration, right? So they first looked to fire new employees, and not just new in their career, but new in their job, and that was thousands of people, and a lot of those have been reinstated through court cases, court decisions. And then the next phase is another acronym, RIF, Reduction in Force, and this is not just directed at the land management agencies, but all agencies to reduce workforce by thousands, tens of thousands of people, in some cases up to 30% of agencies. And it's a direction to these agencies to like, look, minimize the number of people that you've got on your payroll to only what's legislatively required. And that's in process right now. So reducing the workforce is kind of a big thing that's going on presently. Um, and then there's also when the new administration came in, a slew of executive orders that seem to orient towards like treating our public lands like balance sheets, maximize energy production, maximize extractive activity in terms of minerals, timber. Right. There's been some talk about transferring public land for housing to address the housing crisis. Right. Um, so you've got this kind of mindset, this orientation towards looking at our federal lands as purely as just financial assets on a balance sheet, which is not that they're not assets, but they're so much more than just assets on a balance sheet. I mean, they're part of our collective identity and history, right? They're part of what makes this country unique, right? And just looking at the financial value of these places shortchanges what they really mean to folks. So, if you look at all this stuff, like, and there's also been a lot of rhetoric about, balance sheets and lands. And if the Department of Interior was a company, it would have an enormous balance sheet. So there's this trend towards, it seems early, that to frame public lands as simply as assets to be developed or extracted, to uh, uh, ignore or minimize the other value that these places provide, and to undermine the agency's ability to manage these places with reduction of workforce. Um, and like that's the trend. So if the agencies don't have the capacity to manage these lands, it makes implicitly an argument that they should management should be outsourced or the lands should be sold. So it's pretty grim.
Yeah, I would say. um, I'm guessing you've read Project 2025. Have you skimmed it, read it? You're
Yeah, I'm
familiar with?
familiar. Yeah,
I'm
dipped
just
into
kind
it
of
a little
curious
bit.
if from your perspective, if you know, and if you don't, of course, I mean, you've got so much on your plate. I'm just kind of curious if the privatization is like a formal plank amongst people who are see the government assets as a balance sheet.
Yeah, it's a through line through all of it. It's like there's this desire to maximize financial value, and to reduce the debt and to enable cuts in taxes. They want to shrink the federal government, and if they're going to try to approach that, they're going to look at all the resources that are available and use that to that broader goal, right? And you know, land does have substantial assets in terms of extracted value and also property value. So it's something that's got their attention for sure.
Um, I think I could be wrong. Of course, when it comes to numbers, always I could be wrong. But I thought I read somewhere recently that the federal payroll is something like only 3% of the total annual budget. And so, to me, the whole, the fraud, waste, abuse, the trimming government. I mean, a lot of this just seems like a stalking horse because it doesn't really, this is more about just like philosophical destruction and making things easier for other people. Like, oh, it's crap. So we're going to have to sell it off to somebody who can manage it better. Because again, coming back to that national parks investment multiple, the return on investment. I mean, like, if you really want to maximize economically, you're going to invest more in parks instead of having a $13 billion backlog in undone maintenance.
That's
So,
right.
and I think in most cases, like I'm talking out my ears here, but in cases where states have, so when the union was created, a lot of states held on to a lot of their lands, and there's still a lot of lands that are being held by states, right? For often for the value, for the benefit of schools. Like I know this is true in Utah, right? There's a lot of lands that are held for the benefit, and they just get sold off often. I mean, they still have a lot of them, but they end up getting sold off into private lands, and then there's no value to them at that point, right? I mean, to the public good.
Yeah, if if it's public land, it's like you have a right to be there. You have um, a right to have a say in how it's managed. And if it's no longer public, you don't have a right to be there. You don't have a right to say how it's managed. It's gone. So
I mean, maybe what I'm saying is not particularly profound, but I guess fundamentally, when you set aside all the policy stuff, like it's just baffling to me. Like I just don't understand, like unless you solely want to enrich, the people who helped elect you, or unless you just want, uh, an Randian society, then I just don't understand this. Like, like my heart is so deeply invested in the commons, right? These things that we have in commons. And I guess I'm just naive in that sense that there's just always going to be people that want to take it down. But like, I don't, I joke often, I don't understand why we aren't all with our pitchforks in DC right now, because whether it's the economic value or the aesthetic value or the pure innate biological value of open public lands, it just seems self-evident to me.
yeah, yeah. I think you know about how to outrun a bear, right?
Yes. So
Yeah,
tell us though.
yeah, yeah. You don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun the slowest person in the group. And they're coming after like all the agencies. It's not just the Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management. It's everything. Department of Defense, IRS. They're looking to deconstruct Department of Education. Okay, and going back, and it's upsetting and disorienting. But for people like you and me, people from this community, like what can we do? We could gird up and protect the Forest Service and public lands, and we could we could put a cost, a political cost and a social cost of doing that. And we've been doing that from day one with these assaults on the agencies, which explaining like, this is not good, right? It's contrary to our values. It does not make economic sense. The return on investment evaporates, right? And lawmakers are taking notice and they are challenging some of these ideas. So there's a lot of harm and destruction, and and it's part of the Doge mindset and design to strip things down and push things to their breaking point and break them. And then after they're broken, I'm like, okay, well, I guess we need to repair this piece or that piece. So going back to this idea of like, you got to show up. And because we're in a really good position to talk about these things. We're authentic advocates. We're going to mitigate the harm. It could be way more worse if we don't show up. And there may be an opportunity to make things a little better given our perspectives on things. So it's like, it's grim, but it's also inspiring, right? And, you know, can't fix everything, but we could fix this. We could address this.
All right, so let's go out on a positive note here and tell us, what are we going to do, Adam? Like what are these? You got to blank.
Yeah.
No, what are we? Okay, so like you've got me. I'm on the edge of my seat. You got me wound up. I'm ready to make my calls. I'm ready to show up. What is showing? Like, tell us what showing up means.
Stay in the loop with the organizations and the sources of information that inspire you, whether whether it's Outdoor Alliance itself or the Outdoor Alliance member organizations. And we trust the fact that we're monitoring and paying attention to what's going on and identifying opportunities to take action. All right. So like take full advantage of that. Leverage the fact that you have people like Hillary at Winter Wildlands who knows so much about NEPA and will let you know if there's something, if we need to stand up for NEPA. So take a little solace in the fact that our community's got this professional capacity to pay attention to what's going on and empower people to take action when you need to. So you don't have to curl up into a ball into your basement and like wait for all this to roll over, right? You got people, right? So when we share that there's something going on, take it seriously, take action, right? And be mindful of your standing as a constituent. Not all lawmakers care about what you think, but your lawmaker does. You don't have to talk to everybody, but your representative, your member of Congress, your senators, they're accountable to you. So if you got a perspective on things, share it. Show up at town hall meetings and share your perspectives and insights on things. It'll be helpful. Don't give up hope.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, people, you got to subscribe to everybody's newsletters. I'm on Blue Sky. Threads has kind of gotten to be a cesspool already. So one of the things that I love about Blue Sky, which is an independent alternative to Twitter, is that you can do lists. So I have my positive lists. I have the people that empower me and that give me solutions. So and I think all of these organizations and all of these folks are going to be represented there. But yeah, I think that the media is filled with bad news, but I'm finding that the voices of these people who are in the trenches for us, sometimes they're sharing alarming information, but they're also telling us what we can do about it. So yeah, so I would encourage you to empower yourself with that. So as for Outdoor Alliance, they're on all the usuals, right, Adam? You can tell us where you can find you guys.
Yeah, for sure. Instagram, Facebook, X, all of it. Yeah. Like we share it for the show notes as well. So people could see.
Yeah, we'll do that for you guys. So, Adam, thank you so much for the time. I know this is tough stuff to talk about, but I'm feeling a lot better than at the beginning. And you're on hearing you say that you're at the tip of the spear on this fight, and hearing you say that we can and will, is inspiring to me.
Thank you. What's the alternative? You know?
You had to go mountain biking and then you find your trail clothes. There is no alternative. So we're going to do this. We are going to do this. Thank you all, and we will catch you next time.